Are you my daddy? 3 words from a little girl in a faded scarf stopped a millionaire CEO cold. He had no idea that question would unlock a past he buried, a child he never knew, and the only future worth living for. The lobby of Lexington Tower hummed with precision that only Wall Street mornings could produce. Glass, revolving doors spinning in rhythm, designer heels clicking on polished travertine, security gates blinking in corporate cadence. It was a Wednesday in March. Outside, gray clouds pressed low over the skyline, softening the chaos of Manhattan into something almost solemn. Inside, time was currency, and not a second wasted. At precisely 8:03 a.m., Cole Whitaker stepped through the doors of his empire. The founder and CEO of Whitaker Holdings was as recognizable as any face on the financial front page. Towering, composed, and eternally dressed in black and charcoal, he moved with the kind of confidence that came not from arrogance, but the armor of success, long earned and fiercely protected. His phone buzzed in his ear. "Schedule's tight this morning," his assistant murmured through the Bluetooth line. "Board prep in 20, PR call at 10, and—" "I need coffee first," Cole said, voice clipped but steady. He veered left toward the in-house cafe, bypassing a small crowd waiting for the elevators. That was when he heard it. A voice, high and innocent, slicing through the hum like a bell at a funeral. "Are you my daddy?" He stopped mid-step. So did the lobby. The security guard near the entrance turned. The barista froze, foam wand paused mid-pour. Even the intern who had just tripped over her own heels stopped apologizing. Cole turned slowly, the weight of the voice coiling somewhere in his chest like memory. His eyes swept the sleek lobby and landed on the smallest figure in the room, a little girl, no more than 3 or 4, standing alone beside a potted plant nearly twice her height. She wore a fraying pink jacket, her scarf the color of oatmeal and clearly hand-knit. Her blonde curls were a tangled halo. Her eyes, soft, round, and startlingly familiar, looked up at him with a strange mix of hope and certainty. Her boots didn't match. One was navy, the other brown. She took a hesitant step forward, cradling something stuffed in her arms. A plush fox, its ear chewed at the seam. "Are you my daddy?" she asked again, softer this time, but still clear. Cole blinked. He couldn't move, couldn't speak. The child stared up at him like she'd found something the world had hidden. And for a moment he felt exposed. Not in the way tabloids made him feel, not like interviews or board audits. This was different. This was personal. "Emily!" a breathless voice called out, suddenly cracking through the moment like breaking glass. A woman rushed in from the hallway near the restrooms, panic splayed across her features. She looked young, but worn. The kind of tired that settles behind the eyes and doesn't sleep off. Her coat was too thin for the weather, her hair pulled back in a rush, cheeks flushed with cold and maybe embarrassment. She scooped the little girl into her arms. "Sweetheart, no," she whispered, pressing her face against the child's curls. "You can't say things like that, remember?" Turning to the frozen lobby, she offered hurried apologies, voice breathless and breaking. I stepped into the restroom for 2 seconds. She was napping. I didn't mean to cause trouble." No one replied. No one needed to. The woman's eyes finally met Cole's. Just for a second. She didn't seem to recognize him, or if she did, she gave no indication. With a murmured, "Sorry again," she turned and walked swiftly toward the exit, holding the child like a shield. The little girl, Emily, rested her head against her mother's shoulder but peered over it, never breaking eye contact with Cole. He watched the revolving door close behind them. The hum of the lobby returned slowly, like life resuming after a thunderclap. Cole didn't move. He stood there, a billionaire immobilized by a question that should have meant nothing, but didn't. Because something about that girl, the eyes, the voice, the way she'd looked at him, as though she knew him. 28 floors above, Cole stood in his glass-walled office overlooking Bryant Park, fingers gripping the edge of his desk. The city sprawled beneath him in organized chaos, taxis weaving, suits rushing, scaffolding climbing toward the sky. It was a view designed to inspire dominance, but he felt shaken. He tapped his headset. "Logan," he said quietly. His assistant's voice came instantly. "Yes, sir?" "The woman, the girl in the lobby. I want a name, today." A pause. Then, obediently, "Understood." He clicked off without further explanation. None was needed. He already suspected the truth, or at least some version of it. He pulled open a drawer, rifled past contracts, IPO drafts, and media one-pagers until he found a folder long buried, photos from a different life, one he rarely revisited. And there it was, a beach town, a diner with faded red booths, and a photo, taken in Carolina Beach 4 years ago. A woman with sunlight hair and a crooked smile leaning beside him. Her name came back to him like an old song, Maggie Lane. He had gone there to disappear after his fiancée walked out and a hostile takeover left him bleeding reputation. He hadn't planned to stay more than a weekend, but Maggie had worked the late shift at the Driftwood Diner, and somehow she became the quiet in his storm. They talked, sometimes, shared coffee in silence. One night, they shared more, a walk, a drink, laughter he hadn't felt in years, a room above the diner. And then, he left. No note, no return call. Just vanished back into the marble towers of Wall Street, believing she was nothing more than a gentle escape. But if Emily was 3... Cole sank into the leather chair, breath shallow. What have I done? Across the East River, in a modest walk-up in Queens, Maggie Lane wrapped a second blanket around Emily, whose tiny fingers clutched the same fox from that morning. She looked out the window at the haze above the skyline. "Did I do something bad, Mommy?" Emily asked quietly. "No, honey." Maggie ran her hand through her daughter's curls. "You just surprised some people, that's all. I thought maybe he was my daddy." Maggie's hand stilled. Emily added softly, "It's okay if he's not. I still have you." Maggie turned her face away so Emily wouldn't see the tears in her eyes. She whispered, "And I'll always be here, baby. No matter what." But even as she said it, a flicker of memory, of Cole's eyes, of his silence, of his disappearance, stirred something deeper. A question she had buried for years but never truly let go. What if that night wasn't just a moment? What if it was the beginning of something she now had to protect? The sun crept slowly behind the steel ribs of the Manhattan skyline, as though hesitant to start another day in the city that never pauses. Pale morning light filtered through the frosted glass of Cole Whitaker's office, catching faint reflections on the polished walnut desk where he'd been sitting all night. Not because there were contracts to revise, not because Asia's markets had opened, but because of one haunting question. Could it be? A sealed beige envelope lay unopened before him, delivered at precisely 6:00 a.m. by Logan, his trusted assistant. No post-it, no verbal explanation, just a quiet nod, and the door closing behind him, leaving Cole alone with the file and the weight of what it might hold. His fingers trembled slightly as he opened it, a reflex he hadn't felt since law school exams years ago, when every answer could change a life. The first page was blunt, clinical. Name: Margaret Lane, commonly known as Maggie. Age: 30. Current address: Astoria, Queens, New York. Marital status: never married. Children: one daughter, Emily Lane, born April 3 years ago. Current occupation: part-time bakery worker and hourly housekeeper. Former residence: Carolina Beach, North Carolina, circa 2020. Cole's pulse surged. Carolina Beach, 2020. That was the exact time and place he had vanished from Wall Street, where he met Maggie, where he let himself feel something again for the first time in years. Tucked in the report was a color-printed photo, faded, slightly pixelated, but unmistakable. It was her. Sunlight caught in her hair, a lopsided smile on her lips, eyes soft but never pleading. He remembered her exactly like this, calm, grounded, expecting nothing, yet offering everything in a single glance. He turned the pages. There was a simple school file for Emily. No father listed, no guardian besides her mother. The last page held only 4 typed lines. No one has inquired about her. No criminal history, no significant debt. She has supported her child alone. She has never mentioned you. Cole leaned back in his chair, eyes closed. The ache in his chest wasn't from what the file confirmed. It came from what it left unsaid. She hadn't tried to find him. No calls, no angry letters, no threats or demands, only silence. And somehow, that devastated him more than any accusation would have. In the 4 years since, Cole had closed billion-dollar acquisitions, tripled shareholder value, and reshaped the tech investment market. But not once had he reckoned with the human cost of a night he thought was meaningless. Now that cost had a name, a heartbeat, and might just be his daughter. In Queens, at the same hour, Maggie Lane sat at the narrow kitchen table of her walk-up apartment, folding laundry with the weariness of someone who hadn't rested in years. The door buzzer sounded. She rose instinctively, wiped her hands on her jeans, and opened it. No words, just a manila envelope. No sender listed. The return address said, Whitaker Holdings. Her breath caught. She tore it open, her fingers shaking slightly. Inside was a formal invitation to interview for a part-time administrative assistant role at one of the company's Brooklyn branches. The pay was twice what she currently earned. The hours were flexible. Health benefits, even for part-time staff. No referral source listed, no name. Just a courteous professional offer. She looked over at Emily, still curled on the carpet with her crayons, sunlight touching the edges of her hair. Maggie whispered to herself, I don't know if this is a door opening or a trap, but maybe it's something she needs. 3 days later, Maggie stepped into the lobby of Whitaker Brooklyn, a modest satellite office still bearing the quiet opulence of the brand. Oak trim, clean espresso scent, understated art. The HR officer greeted her with rehearsed friendliness. The interview was short. Basic questions about filing, scheduling, her availability, whether she could work while managing childcare. No mention of who referred her. No mention of Cole. She walked out with an offer letter in hand and a knot of questions in her gut. Gratitude stirred in her, but also unease. The instinct every single mother eventually grows. Nothing this good arrives without reason. Meanwhile, in Manhattan, Cole stood in front of a muted screen, watching the security footage from earlier that morning. There she was, Maggie, leaving the Brooklyn office. The wind caught her coat. She clutched a thin canvas tote to her chest. Her shoulders were tight, but her steps were solid. He didn't look away. He didn't reach out. He simply watched. Every day after that, Cole quietly checked the employee access logs, not to control her, but simply to confirm. She was still coming. She was okay. She was real. Still Maggie. He didn't speak to her, but he didn't vanish either. Then came the rain. New York turned gray and wet that afternoon, skies bursting open above the city like a wound. Maggie emerged from the Brooklyn office with Emily in tow, her daughter's small hand wrapped in hers. They had no umbrella. Their coats were soaked within seconds. Cole had just finished a ground-floor meeting. He stepped out onto the plaza and froze when he saw them across the street. Shivering, soaked, the child huddled under Maggie's arm. Without a word, he crossed over and extended his umbrella. Maggie paused, startled. Then her eyes lifted, and they locked, for the first time in 4 years. She didn't say anything, neither did he. Her hand rose slowly and took the umbrella. "Thank you," she said, voice barely above the rain. He nodded once, then turned and walked away into the storm, his tailored shoulders darkening with water. Maggie stood there a moment longer, umbrella now above them both, watching the man disappear without explanation, but not without presence. That night, Emily lay fast asleep, fox toy still tucked beneath her chin. Maggie sat at the kitchen table with the umbrella folded beside her like a monument to something unspoken. It was expensive, far more than she could afford. She didn't know whether she was standing at the beginning of something or at the edge of another heartbreak. But deep within her, something softened. Just a little. Just enough. Every day, Maggie arrived at the office as if punctuality and professionalism could protect her from a world she had never belonged to. She came a few minutes early. She left right on time. No coffee stops in the lobby, no small talk, no looking around for him. At least, she tried. And Cole, he kept his promise. He didn't approach, he didn't interfere, he didn't call, but still, he stayed. He was present, like a tree just outside the window. He didn't beg for attention, didn't demand sunlight. But quietly, he offered shade. That presence began in the smallest ways, and like all things deep and true, it arrived silently. Tuesday afternoon. Maggie picked Emily up from daycare. The wind scattered leaves along the sidewalk as they made their way up the cracked stairwell of their apartment building. Waiting outside their door was a small cardboard box. No name, no note. She opened it carefully. Inside was a pair of red children's boots, soft-lined and waterproof, the exact size Emily wore. High quality. The kind Maggie had only ever seen in catalogs, never in person. Emily gasped. "Mommy! They're so pretty! Who gave them to us?" Maggie stood still for a moment. "Someone kind," she said softly. 2 days later, a book appeared inside their old brass mailbox, a hardcover children's story titled Castles and Kindness. The tale was about a lost baby dragon led home by a girl with no crown, only courage. On the inside cover, in neat, careful handwriting, "For Emily." No other message, but Maggie no longer needed one. One sunny afternoon, Maggie arrived at the daycare a little earlier than usual. She stood quietly near the gate, her hand on the latch. Children's laughter floated through the breeze. And there, in the center of the grass, was him, Cole, sleeves rolled up, crouched beside a cardboard box, helping the kids build a castle out of toilet paper rolls, stickers, and glitter glue. Emily sat beside him, carefully placing a paper flag. He didn't look up. He didn't know she was watching. Emily suddenly asked, "Mr. Cole, are you really my daddy?" Cole paused. Maggie held her breath, ready to intervene. But Cole simply smiled, brushed a strand of hair from Emily's cheek, and answered gently, "I'm someone who thinks you're very, very special. Is that okay?" Emily nodded and returned to coloring. Maggie stood at the gate for a long time. Her heart didn't shatter. It softened. That evening, Emily sat on the couch, proudly wearing a sparkly paper crown. "He made this for me," she said, grinning. "I told him I liked glitter, and he brought some the next day." Maggie smiled faintly, smoothing the damp curls from her daughter's forehead. She didn't respond. But later that night, when Emily was asleep, Maggie opened her purse. Tucked inside was a child's drawing in crayon. 3 stick figures holding hands beneath a big yellow sun. Below, in crooked letters, "Me, Mom, Mr. Cole." That weekend, Cole didn't come by the daycare. He didn't call. He didn't send anything. But Maggie knew. He was still near, not to monitor, but to care. One afternoon, just after a passing rain, Maggie and Emily sat at a quiet bench in Riverside Park. Maggie read quietly while Emily twirled in the grass, collecting dandelions and laughter. A black SUV pulled up across the street and idled. The window didn't roll down. No one stepped out. Just a shadow of someone watching, patiently, distantly, respectfully. Emily pointed. "Mommy, that's Mr. Cole's car." Maggie turned. "Are you sure?" "Yes," Emily said confidently. "He comes by sometimes, but he doesn't want to bother us." Maggie looked at the car again. And then, it was gone. That night, Maggie sat at her small kitchen table, a single lamp casting gold against the umbrella still folded beside her from the week before. For the first time in years, she opened a journal. She wrote, "He hasn't asked for forgiveness. He hasn't claimed a title. He's just showing up, and maybe that's the part I wasn't ready for." By Monday, the sky hung low and gray, pressing its silence down on the city like a hand not yet ready to let go. Rain came, not heavy, but persistent, like a quiet grief that refused to lift. Maggie hurried through the ground-floor lobby of the Whitaker Brooklyn office, clutching a folder to her chest. She was heading toward the copy room on the 3rd floor, the one at the end of the corridor with flickering lights and air that always felt too warm. She had no idea that in a matter of seconds, her entire world would shift. She pushed open the door with her shoulder, and there he was, Cole. Wearing a slate-gray shirt, hand still on the door handle, he looked up, and everything they hadn't said for 4 years rushed in like a wave crashing against glass. Neither spoke. Maggie's fingers went slack. The stack of papers in her arms slid and scattered across the floor. White light from the overhead fixtures fell between them. 2 people who once shared a night of silence now facing each other in the most ordinary room, filled with the most extraordinary weight. Cole opened his mouth. A breath. But Maggie was already turning. And then she ran. Her footsteps echoed down the hall like gasps she couldn't catch. She didn't wait for the elevator. She flew down the stairwell, her hands gripping the railing, her soft-soled shoes slipping slightly on the slick steps. Her heart pounded. Her ears rang. She wasn't sure where she was running. She only knew she couldn't stay. Behind her, heavier footsteps followed. "Maggie, wait!" But she didn't. She burst through the front doors of the building and into the rain. It slapped against her face, cold and sharp. Her arms wrapped around her chest as though holding in the pieces. Carroll Gardens shimmered in water and noise, taxis, headlights, horns. She stepped off the curb without looking. A black sedan came barreling around the corner. A horn blared. "Watch out!" Cole shouted. He lunged forward, grabbed her waist, and pulled her back just as the car screeched past, narrowly missing them both. They collapsed onto the wet concrete. For a moment, neither moved. There was no sound except the rain and their breathing. Loud, frantic, real. Maggie sat up, her hands trembling in her lap. She didn't scream, she didn't lash out. She simply cried, silent, broken tears falling into the collar of her coat, mixing with the rain. Cole knelt beside her, chest still heaving. He reached out, then hesitated. Finally, his voice broke. "Emily, is she mine?" Maggie turned. Her eyes were red, but not weak. She nodded. "Yes, she is." Cole exhaled as though he'd been holding his breath for years. But before he could speak again, she added, sharp and clear, "But she's only mine now." He staggered slightly, as if the words had landed like a blow. Maggie stood slowly, brushing the grit from her skirt with unsteady hands. She didn't look at him as she spoke. "You never came back. Not a call, not a message. I waited, stupidly, hopefully. But I was just someone you used to forget your pain. A night you don't even remember." Cole shook his head. "Maggie, I didn't know. I swear I didn't remember that night clearly until—" "Exactly," she interrupted, her voice cracking. "You don't remember, but I do. I remember carrying her, giving birth alone, watching her take her first steps, hearing her first words. And I remember the day she asked, 'Mommy, why don't I have a daddy like the other kids?'" Her voice broke again. "And I didn't know what to say." Cole had no reply. There was no rebuttal, no justification that wouldn't sound hollow. He stepped closer, but she stepped back. "I'm not here to punish you," she said quietly. "I've made peace with it. I chose to keep her. I don't regret it, but don't think you can walk back in and fix it. There's nothing left to fix." "I don't want to fix it," he said gently. "I just want to be part of it." She looked at him, eyes rimmed with exhaustion. "You don't get to decide that alone anymore." And then she walked away. Cole stood there, soaked through beneath the Brooklyn rain. No umbrella, no coat. Just bare hands, an unchangeable past, and a heart that had only just begun to feel. He watched her disappear around the corner, and for the first time in his life, he felt powerless. A few days passed. Maggie didn't see him at work. Not near the elevators. Not in the lobby. Not at the daycare. He was gone again. And for a moment it felt like everything had settled. But then, he returned in traces. A new pair of perfectly sized shoes for Emily, this time with a sticky note. Got the right size now. A box of colored pencils and thick drawing paper. Emily squealed with joy. A children's book left at the apartment front desk. For the little princess who loves to dream. And the cookies. Oatmeal chocolate chip, soft baked, Emily's favorite. From a bakery Maggie had never been able to afford. They arrived one afternoon in a white box with Emily's name on the label. No return address, no signature. But Maggie knew. She didn't say anything, didn't call, didn't send the gifts back. But that night, after Emily fell asleep, Maggie sat by the window. The umbrella he'd once handed her rested quietly by the door. She didn't cry. She didn't smile. She just sat there, longer than usual. And for the first time in a long time, she didn't feel alone. By late April, New York had begun to thaw, not just from winter, but from the weariness that lingered in the bones of those who had simply endured. At the daycare center on Carlton Avenue, sunshine spilled across the lawn, warming tricycles and sidewalk chalk drawings. It was snack time, and children buzzed with laughter, faces smeared with peanut butter and juice. Maggie arrived early, clutching her tote bag to her side like armor. She paused outside the fence, and then froze. There he was again. Cole, kneeling in the grass, sleeves rolled up, his expensive shoes splattered with glue and glitter. He was surrounded by half a dozen children, including Emily, all gathered around a cardboard box that had been transformed into a castle, complete with tissue paper flags, crayon windows, and towers made from empty paper towel rolls. Emily sat beside him like a queen in council, concentrating on applying sparkly star stickers to the drawbridge. She looked happy. Not distracted happy. Not pretend happy. Real. Maggie didn't move. Cole didn't see her. Or if he did, he didn't show it. He was listening intently as Emily described her castle rules, nodding solemnly. "Everyone is kind in this castle," she said, "and no one is too big to say sorry." Cole's smile was quiet. "Those sound like good rules." Emily paused, then asked without pretense, "Are you my dad yet?" He blinked. "I don't know," he said gently. "But I do know I think you're the most incredible person I've ever met, and that I'm lucky just to be here with you. Is that okay?" Emily nodded. Then she handed him a gold sticker. "You can put this on the gate. It's where people say, 'Thank you.'" He took it as though it were a medal. Maggie watched from behind the fence, a breeze tugging at her coat. She didn't cry. She didn't run. She simply stood there and, for the first time, allowed herself to see who he had become. Not the man who had left, the one who had come back. That evening, Maggie reheated leftover soup while Emily sat at the kitchen table, crown still askew on her head, proudly showing off a drawing she had made. "I drew us again," she said, holding up the paper. Maggie took it. 3 stick figures, one with long hair, one very small, and one wearing what looked like a tie and glasses. Above them, a sun with a smiling face. Below, in big, shaky letters, "My family." Maggie looked at the picture for a long time. She didn't say anything, but her fingers traced the lines slowly, reverently, as though memorizing something sacred. Over the next few weeks, Cole became a quiet rhythm in their lives. He didn't call himself anything. He never once used the word father. But he showed up at daycare events, at rainy bus stops, at the park on Saturdays with snacks he just happened to have extra of. He never stayed long, but he never failed to come. Maggie didn't encourage it. She also didn't stop it. She watched, and slowly, her heart stopped bracing for disappointment. One Sunday morning, as they sat on a worn blanket in Riverside Park, Emily asked a new question. "Do daddies always know their daddies?" Maggie blinked. "I don't think they always do," she said slowly. "But sometimes, when they find out, they try really hard to learn." Emily seemed satisfied with that. She crawled into Maggie's lap, rested her cheek on her mother's chest, and whispered, "I think Mr. Cole is learning." That night, Maggie stood at the sink, washing the dinner dishes, while Emily built a blanket fort on the couch. Her phone buzzed on the windowsill. A single message. No name. Just, "Thank you for letting me learn. C." She stared at the screen, then at the ceiling, and finally, she smiled. Not wide, not dramatic, but real. Later, she tucked Emily in, smoothing her curls. "Mommy," the little girl mumbled, already halfway to sleep. "Can we keep him?" Maggie hesitated, then leaned down and whispered, "Maybe he's the one keeping us." It began with a paper crown, creased, crooked, and glittering with dried glue. Emily had made it herself for the upcoming art fair at her school, a modest public elementary on Baltic Street. The kind with fading murals, a PTA that ran on coffee and prayer, and teachers who bought classroom supplies with their own money. The art fair wasn't grand, but to Emily, it was everything. And to Cole, who had spent most of his adult life building steel empires and billion-dollar mergers, it might as well have been Carnegie Hall. He arrived early, 30 minutes before the doors opened. He stood on the far side of the street, watching as families streamed in, holding foil-wrapped baked goods and cheap bouquets. Cole held nothing in his hands, but his coat pocket contained a card he hadn't yet found the courage to give. On the front, a hand-drawn sketch of 3 stick figures. Inside, 2 words. For Emily. When the line cleared, he crossed the street. The gymnasium smelled of Elmer's glue, cafeteria spaghetti, and Crayola markers. Art lined every wall, papier-mâché volcanoes, popsicle stick rockets, finger paintings that bled joy in every direction. Cole spotted Emily instantly. She stood by her poster board in her slightly too big sneakers and a purple dress Maggie had ironed that morning. On her head sat the crown, lopsided but regal. When she saw Cole, her eyes lit up. "You came," he smiled. "Of course I did." She grabbed his hand, leading him past a clay dinosaur and a painting of outer space. "This one's mine," she beamed, pointing at a mixed media collage of a castle, a cloud, and what might have been a dragon, though it wore glasses and had a briefcase. Cole laughed. "Is that me?" Emily nodded proudly. "It's called The Dragon Who Forgot He Had a Heart." A lump formed in his throat. "That's a good title," he said softly. Maggie approached quietly from the side, arms crossed, a hint of amusement behind her tired eyes. "You made it," she said. "I wouldn't miss it," he replied. There was an awkward pause. Not cold, just cautious. Emily turned to them, eyes sparkling. "Can he come with us after, just for hot chocolate?" Maggie hesitated, then nodded. "Just for a bit." They walked through Carroll Gardens under a sky of faded lavender, past bookshops and corner delis, down streets still damp from a passing shower. Emily skipped ahead, her crown tilted like a halo. Cole walked beside Maggie in silence. She finally broke it. "She's opened up to you." "I know. She's let you in." Cole nodded, then looked at her. "But have you?" Maggie didn't answer. Not yet. They reached a quiet cafe, the kind with chipped mugs and faded jazz on the speakers. The three of them settled into a corner booth. Emily talked endlessly about dragons and castles and how her class hamster might be pregnant. She let Cole sip from her whipped cream. She held both their hands beneath the table. Cole didn't stop smiling. Maggie didn't stop watching. Not judging, not resisting, just noticing. That night, back in their apartment, Maggie tucked Emily in. The paper crown now sat on the nightstand, slightly crumpled. "Mommy," Emily whispered, "do you think he'll come next time, too?" Maggie brushed a curl from her daughter's face. "If you want him to, I think he will." Emily smiled, then drifted into sleep. Maggie stayed up late that night. Cole had walked them home. Not too close, not too far. He had said goodnight at the building's steps, his hands deep in his coat pockets. And then, before turning away, he said, "Thank you. For today." Maggie had nodded. But now, in the quiet of her kitchen, she stared at the card he had slipped her when Emily wasn't looking. She opened it. Inside, 3 words I never said when I should have. Then in bold handwriting, simple and sure, I was wrong. No apology, no excuses, just truth. And for Maggie, who had spent years carrying silence like a second skin, it meant more than flowers or diamonds ever could. She pressed the card to her chest, and for the first time in years, she let herself believe that people, real people, could change. The next morning, she placed the card in Emily's memory box, beside a lock of baby hair and the hospital bracelet from the day she was born. Because no matter what came next, this was part of their story now. And this time, they were writing it together. The first time Maggie saw where Cole lived, it wasn't planned. He hadn't invited her, she hadn't asked. But sometimes, stories unfold not with intention, but by interruption. It started with a phone call. Maggie was folding laundry, the radio humming softly in the background, when her phone lit up with a number she didn't recognize. She almost didn't answer. But something in her chest whispered, "Pick up." It was Cole's assistant, calm, professional. "There's been an incident," she said. "Mr. Whitaker collapsed during a board meeting. He's stable now, but he asked for you. Only you." The room tilted. Maggie dropped a shirt mid-fold. Emily was at school. Maggie scribbled a note for the neighbor, grabbed her coat, and hailed a cab before she could think too much. Cole's penthouse was nothing like she expected. No marble floors, no gold accents. It was clean but warm, sparse, yes, but not in a cold way. A cello leaned against the wall. The scent of cedar lingered in the air, and a half-read copy of The Little Prince sat open on the kitchen counter. When she entered, he was lying on the couch, an IV drip tucked behind the armrest. His eyes opened the moment he heard her footsteps. "You came," he murmured. She nodded, carefully setting her purse down. "What happened?" she asked, sitting beside him, her voice low. He let out a slow breath. My heart gave out. Briefly. They said it was stress. Long-term fatigue. I've been pushing too hard. Again. You didn't tell anyone? I didn't think it mattered. Silence. She reached for a glass of water and handed it to him. He took it. Their fingers brushed. I've been meaning to explain things, he said. About that night. About why I disappeared. Maggie didn't respond, so he kept going. I was in Vermont the week before I met you, he began. My mom. She was dying. Lung cancer. It spread fast. Maggie's shoulders tightened. She was everything to me. The only one who knew how to quiet my storms. I watched her fade away in a hospice bed day after day. When she finally passed, I didn't cry. I didn't talk. I just got in my car and drove. To Brooklyn? To anywhere. I found a diner. Your diner. I sat in the corner and watched the rain blur the windows. And then you walked up to my table, and you smiled like I mattered. She didn't speak. Her breath caught in her throat. That night, it wasn't about forgetting. It was about remembering how it felt to feel again. You made me laugh when I thought I'd never smile again. He paused. But then the morning came, and with it, shame, guilt. My father was calling. My board wanted me back, and I thought if I ignored that night, it would mean it never happened, that I hadn't let myself be vulnerable. And so you disappeared. Yes. He looked her in the eye then, really looked. And I've regretted it every day since. Maggie's eyes were glossy, not angry, just full of years of holding things in. I was just a waitress, Cole, she said quietly. You were a ghost with a credit card. You didn't owe me anything. I did. I do. She shook her head. I'm not here for your penance. I know, but I still want to give it. They sat there in silence, broken only by the faint hum of city life outside the window. Eventually, she rose, walked toward the bookshelf. Her fingers brushed over spines until they landed on a photo frame, face down. She picked it up. It was his mother. Kind eyes, hair like his. In the corner of the frame, scribbled in faded ink, "Don't forget who you are when no one's looking." Maggie turned. Did she know about Emily? Cole's voice cracked. She would have loved her. Before she left, she walked to the door. Hand on the knob, she paused. You still have a lot to prove, she said. He nodded. I know. But you started. That matters. She turned back, looked at him, vulnerable, flawed, not a billionaire in that moment, but just a man. Then, softly, she said, We'll see where this goes. And then, she was gone. But this time he didn't feel abandoned. He felt seen. That night, Cole opened Emily's drawing again. The one with the castle, the dragon with glasses. He placed it beside his mother's photo, then turned the frame around, facing out, as if to say, I'm ready now, to be known, to stay. Cole had been invited to many things in his life. Shareholder meetings, black tie galas, private yacht dinners off the coast of Sicily. But never until now had he received an invitation like this. It came in the form of a crayon drawing shoved into his hand outside daycare pickup. Emily's handwriting was crooked, the E written backward. On the paper, 3 stick figures seated at a tiny table with spaghetti flying everywhere. Above it, "Daddy, do you want to eat dinner with us?" She had written it before asking permission. And somehow, Maggie didn't take it back. He arrived at 6:01 p.m., not in a suit, not with a driver, just Cole, in a soft flannel shirt holding a paper bag with fresh bread and a nervous smile. Maggie opened the door, apron still tied at her waist, hair pulled back. For a moment they looked at each other, not like strangers, not like lovers, like people starting something honest. The apartment was small but warm. A hand-me-down couch, a chipped coffee table covered in Legos, walls decorated with finger paintings, not fine art. Cole took it in like a man discovering gravity. No gold, no polish, just life. Emily rushed over, her socks sliding on the hardwood. "I helped stir the sauce." "She really did," Maggie added from the kitchen, "and only spilled twice." Dinner was simple: spaghetti, steamed green beans, store-bought lemonade in plastic cups. Cole had eaten 5-course meals designed by Michelin-starred chefs, but none had ever made him feel like this. Full. Home. Human. They sat around the small table, one adult chair borrowed from the neighbor, one stool from Emily's playroom. 3 people. 3 plates. 3 stories crossing paths. Emily chattered between bites, telling Cole about the hamster election in her class and how her teacher once sneezed so hard the whiteboard marker flew across the room. Cole listened like it was gospel. Maggie watched quietly. After dinner, Emily disappeared into the living room, announcing she was off to build a moon station with stuffed animals. Maggie stayed behind, gathering plates. Cole stood to help. "You don't have to." "I want to," he said. And he did. He dried dishes while Maggie washed. The rhythm between them was almost old, like something familiar they hadn't realized they missed. She handed him a wet spoon. He took it like it was sacred. "Thank you for tonight," he said quietly. She didn't look up. "You're welcome." Emily's waited a long time for a night like this. "I think I have too." That made her glance at him. "Not just for her?" she asked. He paused. "No, not just for her." Maggie didn't smile, but her eyes softened. She turned off the tap. The sink stopped, but the moment hung full. In the living room, Emily called out, "Mommy, can Mr. Cole tuck me in just one night?" Maggie hesitated, then nodded. "He can." Cole knelt by the small twin bed, the sheets covered in cartoon planets. Emily's crown from the art fair sat beside her pillow. He tucked the blanket up to her chin, carefully, slowly. She grabbed his wrist before he pulled away. "You can come back, right?" His voice cracked before he could answer. I hope I can. You can if you want, she said, closing her eyes. You're my daddy now. Cole sat frozen beside the bed. Those words, not declared, not demanded, just offered, like a paper crown held out in trust. He bent down and kissed her forehead. I'm the luckiest daddy in the universe. She was already asleep. Back in the kitchen, Maggie poured 2 cups of tea. Chamomile, cheap brand, slightly oversteeped, but when she slid the cup across the table to Cole, it felt more important than champagne. He took it with both hands. Steam rose between them like breath held too long. They sat. No plans, no promises, just presence. Outside, New York carried on, sirens in the distance, car horns, a dog barking 3 floors down. But inside that small Astoria apartment, it was quiet, still. Maggie looked up. You're not the same man you were 4 years ago. Cole swallowed. No, I'm not. Good, she said. Because neither am I. She didn't need to say. They drank their tea in silence. And then, just as he stood to leave, Maggie whispered, You can come back tomorrow, if you want. He turned, met her eyes. I do. And this time, when he stepped into the hallway, he didn't feel like a visitor. He felt like someone on his way home. There was no announcement, no dramatic turning point. Cole didn't move in. He didn't propose. He didn't change the locks on his penthouse. But quietly, he arrived. Every day. At 7:45 a.m., he was outside Maggie's building with 2 coffees. Black for her, hot cocoa for Emily. On Wednesdays, he brought bagels. On Fridays, he brought flowers, small ones, nothing grand. Daisies once. Wild roses the next. He didn't ask for anything in return. And slowly Maggie stopped looking over her shoulder, stopped bracing for the goodbye. Emily, of course, had no such hesitation. She called him Daddy now like she'd been doing it all her life. One morning, Cole stood in the hallway helping Emily with her shoelaces while Maggie looked on. Double knot, Emily instructed seriously. Yes, ma'am, Cole replied, grinning. Maggie laughed softly, then caught herself. Cole looked up. Was that laughter? He teased. She rolled her eyes. Don't get used to it. But her smile stayed. By late spring, they had routines. Sundays in the park, Thursdays at the library, movie nights on the second Saturday of the month with popcorn and pillows on the floor. It was unremarkable in the best way. It was life. And for the first time since his mother died, Cole stopped feeling like he was waiting to live. Until the letter came. It arrived on a Monday, addressed in tidy handwriting to Cole's office. The return address said, Vermont Department of Public Records, Burlington. He opened it slowly. Inside was a manila folder, and inside that, a copy of a will, his mother's. He'd read her will before, or thought he had, but this version included something new, something added by hand a month before her death. A note, written in her voice, to him. Cole, if you're reading this, it means I didn't have the chance to say it in person. Love isn't a contract. It isn't a perfect plan. It's mess and pain and staying anyway. If you ever find someone who makes you want to stay, really stay, don't waste time. Don't wait for someday. Do it today. And don't be afraid to love more than once. I promise, hearts know how to stretch. Cole sat in his office for a long time, staring at the letter with his hands trembling. All those years, she had known he wasn't finished grieving. And still, she'd left him permission, not just to love Emily, but to love Maggie. That night, he walked to their apartment. No driver, no coat. The air smelled like lilacs and warm cement. He knocked once. Maggie opened the door. He stood there, breathless, holding the letter like it might vanish. "I thought I'd buried her without saying goodbye," he said. "But it turns out she saved her goodbye for when I was ready." Maggie took the letter, read it slowly. When she finished, she pressed it to her heart. "Do you think maybe she met Emily before we did?" Cole smiled through tears. "Maybe she sent her." Emily was already asleep. They sat on the fire escape, a blanket between them, the sounds of the city humming beneath their feet. "I love you," Cole said suddenly. Maggie froze. He wasn't looking at her. He was looking at the stars. Not performing, not asking, just offering. A truth, placed gently between them like a teacup. Maggie didn't respond right away, but when she slid her hand into his, it was answer enough. The next morning, as they walked Emily to school, she looked up and asked, "Do families always happen this slow?" Maggie laughed. "The best ones usually do." Cole smiled down at them both. "One day," he whispered, "I'm going to marry your mommy." Emily grinned. "Well, you better ask her soon. She doesn't wait around forever." Cole met Maggie's eyes. She didn't flinch. She didn't run. She just said, "Not someday?" And he said, "No, today." The courtroom was smaller than Cole imagined. No chandeliers, no echoes. Just a judge in wireframe glasses, a wooden bench that creaked when you sat too far back, and a flag that leaned slightly to the left. Cole stood beside Maggie, his hand not touching hers, but close. Close enough to feel her breath rise and fall, steady, like the tide. Emily sat between them, legs dangling from the chair, wearing a sky-blue dress and shiny new shoes she'd picked out herself. On her head, the paper crown from the art fair, now slightly faded but still proudly intact. She clutched a stuffed llama with one hand. In the other, she held a sheet of paper, her adoption decree. The judge cleared his throat, eyes kind. "Emily Rose Carter," he said. "Do you understand what today means?" Emily nodded solemnly. "It means I get a forever daddy." The entire room exhaled softly. Maggie's hand found Cole's. This time they held on tight. The judge smiled. "And is that what you want?" Emily beamed. "Yes, but also..." She looked at Maggie. "Can I say one more thing?" The judge nodded. "Go ahead, sweetheart." Emily stood on the chair, unrolling the paper in her hand. She began to read. "My name used to be Emily Rose Monroe, but today I want to be Emily Rose Whitaker, because I want the same name as the man who makes me pancakes, who learns how to braid, who reads the voices in bedtime stories just right. I want the same name as the man who stayed. Maggie pressed her fingers to her mouth. Cole didn't move. He couldn't. The courtroom fell silent. Then, gently, the judge nodded. "Let the record reflect," he said, voice soft with emotion, "that from this day forward, Emily Rose Whitaker is the legal daughter of Mr. Cole Whitaker." Bang! The gavel came down. But it didn't feel like an ending. It felt like a beginning. That afternoon, they went to Riverside Park. Same blanket, same bench. But this time, a family. Cole lay on his back, one hand behind his head, the other holding Maggie's. Emily was curled up beside them, her dress grass-stained, the crown askew. "I didn't think I'd ever have this," Maggie whispered. Cole turned to her. "Have what?" "This kind of peace. The kind that doesn't look like a movie. It just feels like air after a storm." He nodded slowly. "It's the kind you build, not buy." Later that night, back at the apartment, Cole tucked Emily into bed. She grabbed his wrist like she always did, anchoring herself. "Daddy?" "Yes, sweetheart." "What's your favorite day ever?" Cole thought. Then smiled. "Today." She grinned. "Mine too." Maggie stood in the doorway watching. Cole looked up at her. He crossed the room slowly. "I love you," he said. This time she didn't hesitate. "I love you too." He knelt before her, took a ring from his pocket. Not diamonds, not flashy. Simple. Gold. Engraved with one word. Stay. "Marry me?" he asked. She didn't cry. She didn't gasp. She just whispered, like a promise long overdue. "Yes." The next morning, Emily ran into school with a backpack twice her size and a drawing for show and tell. It showed 3 stick figures. One had long hair, one had glasses, one had a crown. Above them, in bold, backward letters, "My Forever Family."